when you first experienced the loss of your son, describe to us the type of emotions that you were feeling during that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my son was 19 years old. I was the parent that received the knock at the door. And ironically enough, the police that showed up at my door handed me a note, instead of telling me what had happened and told me to give that person a call. So I assumed there was no severity in what they needed. Maybe my son, he was 19, got in trouble. I just felt like if it was something horrific, they would have told me in person. And so when I dialed the number, I thanked them and they went on their merry way. And I dialed that number, and the person on the other line answered Greene County Coroner. My world, my emotions at that very moment was complete disbelief, shock, overwhelmed with, all kinds of sadness, of course. And at first, I'll be honest, I really, truly did not believe that they had the right person. Like they didn't have the right mother, the right Justin. Like this was all a big misunderstanding. And most of all, I just tried to talk to the coroner and say, listen, where's my son? I can fix this, right? Like tell me where he is. Where do I need to go to fix this? And so at first it was a lot of denial, a lot of shock, a lot of disbelief. And then ironically enough, you go into an autopilot, or what I think autopilot means. And I knew, because this was newsworthy, this was a murder in a small town, that it was all over the news. But of course, my son's name hadn't been given. And so I immediately, you go into this hurry up, call everybody, and try to sort of explain when I didn't know the details myself. And true, like I didn't know the whole story. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know the why behind it, but I wanted to make sure they heard it from me versus the news, of course. And I from there it was autopilot for days after that. It wasn't a lot of course I was, crying and devastated and shock and all of those things, those first few days. But you sort of go through the motions of, you've got to take care of it. So you sort of start going point A, point B, point C. And although you're overwhelmed with, the tragedy and the emotions of you losing your son, you just aren't really, I say it's like it's just like a candle wax melting. You're sort of just like in the thick of it, right? And it's just all melting together, and you're just trying to survive, right? Then once after the funeral and everything goes on, those next days, weeks, and months, rage began to come in, and anger and frustration. And I was in a very, very dark place, and I didn't recognize myself and who I was becoming. And all of those emotions in those first weeks and months, you were just barely surviving. And on top of that, because of the tragic events, then there was the anger, which I'm sure many, even in the griefs of others, there's a lot of rage, a lot of anger, a lot of why him, why this person, why that person. And so I think it was also and understanding, like I didn't know how this grief thing worked, right? Like I didn't know how to grieve. I didn't know if I was doing it right, if I was doing it wrong, if this wasn't what the TV looked like, this wasn't what the movies looked like, right? This was I was in your face, and there was days I could cry, there was days I couldn't cry, there was days that I could get out of bed, there was days I couldn't get out of bed. And it was just a very dark and ugly place for a very long time. And it was very, very hard. And I tell anyone that is going through grief is that it is unique, like you said, very unique to you, and you cannot compare it to any other grief you've had in the past, to any other grief that you'll have in the future. and to anybody else's grief. Don't allow them to compare it to you as well. So, yeah, for the first few weeks, months, it was an ugly, dark place for sure.